Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest NCSA webinar. My name is Jill Escher, and I am the president of NCSA, and I'm very pleased to introduce to you this webinar on transitioning despite the barriers, a review of the law and practical tips to beat the barriers and achieve the transition plan you are entitled to under the law. We have two speakers today. Judy Weinstock, a lawyer based in New Jersey with the firm of Parles Rekem. She's sitting in for Lisa Parles, who is unable to be with us today. Thank you so much, Judy, for being with us.
Very welcome.
And also Dr. Gloria Satriali, who is on our NCSA board. And she actually runs a school in Pennsylvania and is deeply involved in transition planning herself. So I am going to, without further ado, turn it over to Judy. But before I do, just mention that we are recording this. We will load it on our website and on our YouTube channel. Please submit questions. You can do it either via chat or Q&A. We're not being particular this time around. And I will probably field most or pitch most of those questions toward the end of the session. So if I have Judy put up her slides. I think we're still on Gloria's slides. Gloria, you can stop sharing. And then,
do you see mine?
Well, the slides are all together, so.
Oh, they're all together.
Yes. They're all
Yes.
together.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Then in that case, take it away.
Okay, do you guys see what I see? Objectives and
We
on the
do.
objectives? Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here sitting in for Lisa. I know she really wanted to be here, but she had an emergency and she had to leave and not be. She was regretful that she was unable to present today. But I'm excited to be here. I'm excited that you're here, and I hope that this presentation is as informative and as helpful as possible. With Dr. Satrial, I know it will be. And just to give you an idea, just the overall objectives of what we want to provide to you today, I'm going to sort of give you the provisions of what the federal law provides as what your rights are, what the rights are for children with disabilities, what the obligations are of the districts and the programming that's required, how you can recognize and help your families plan around some barriers that develop and have developed, especially with COVID, as we all have experienced this past year and a half. We want to help you develop strategies to effectively assess and plan for engaging a meaningful life beyond transition age. And Dr. Satrial will talk a lot about that and what programming there is for you. We want to review the core components of a successful transition plan, and I'm going to talk about how what your rights are, and if that doesn't happen, what avenues you have to address that. And I think, overall, we want you to come out with, an experience, to know what a model transition program looks like, and to have sort of a vision of what you would like to do or start planning for the children in your lives with disabilities. So I'm going to go on to the law. This is kind of the boring, dry stuff. I'll try to get through it somewhat quickly. I think you probably are quite familiar already with the federal laws that grant rights to children with disabilities. Section 504 is one of those laws. It's actually Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. It's really a civil rights law for the disabled. It's an anti-discrimination law. And then we have the Individuals with Disabilities Act from 2004, which really provides very specifically about what the requirements are as far as services and programming for children with disabilities. It goes beyond just discrimination and provides that these students must be provided specific remedies to address their disabilities in order for them to have opportunities and proceed and be functioning and independent as possible. And have a quality of life. This is a federal mandate, and it's implemented through state statutes. Every state has their own statutes and regulations. For example, in New Jersey, we have the Administrative Code, which is an example, and JAC is the site, 6A14-1. It covers basically how they're implementing the federal law in the state. And sometimes states provide more protections or more rights in the federal law. It can never provide less. It can never conflict with the federal law, which provides certain rights and certain programming that your children, that districts and other programs are required to supply or provide. And case law, basically, courts interpret what the federal law and state laws mean. If there's any question about whether a specific law applies to your situation, courts resolve that. If there's ambiguity about how a statute, what it means and how it applies in your child's life, the court interprets the law. Okay, so just to go back, so the IDEA's mandate, you probably are all familiar with this as well. It entitles all children who meet the definition of a child with a disability to receive a free, appropriate public education, what we call FAPE. We really like these acronyms. So FAPE is very important. It's what IDEA is all about, and it's providing that in the least restrictive environment, or LRE, that is appropriate in order for each student, each child to make meaningful progress. Okay, having a little technical, okay, there we go. Now, very important, transition under the IDEA, and that's what we're here to discuss. So the IDEA defines transition services as a coordinated set of activities for the child with a disability that's designed to, very important, be results oriented, that this is all about what's gonna happen at the end of this, right? So it's focused on improving the academic and functional achievement to facilitate the child's movement, the transition from school to post-school activities. And that's why it's so important. We're coming from school where we're learning things, we're learning skills, and now here's the transition and how we're going to learn more skills to directly affect our everyday functional living, and also how we're going to engage with the community, to what extent, and how we're going to apply those skills, and if we can apply them, and how we generalize them. So such as, post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, continuing in adult education, whatever the post-secondary, whatever the goal is, as far as after, 12th grade, then that is how the program is supposed to be geared. It's based on the individual child's needs. It's taking into account their strengths, their preferences, and their interests as well. Okay, so this slide is about when should transition planning begin and what's required. Well, we think it should begin as soon as possible, or as soon as it's deemed appropriate by the IEP team. Across the board, the federal law is 16. It's the latest that it should be put into effect, a transition program, but many states actually have their own different ages. Some states have 14, and it's important to know what your rights are, is how late they can put into effect or include in an IEP a transition program. But it can't be later than 16. We always recommend that as soon as possible, when appropriate, you really should start planning. And this includes incorporating the appropriate measurable meaning, that you can measure progress. You can assess how your child is doing, how the child is doing, and toward their goals. So appropriate measurable transition goals should be based on age-appropriate transition assessments related to training, education, employment, and if needed, independent living skills. So these types of assessments, run the gamut. It can be OT, PT, it can be academic, it can be a variety of different types of assessments that need to be completed in order to create these measurable transition goals. The transition services, it includes the transition services and the programming that's required to assist, to basically teach your child in reaching those goals, and to watch them as they generalize the skills that are needed to reach those goals. So appropriate transition goals. This is sort of a repeat of what I just said, but as the case with all IEP goals, they need to be measurable. Very important that you can actually collect data, assess, and see if the child's making progress towards those goals. And they must be developed based on the unique needs. This is in the law, the unique needs of each student. And that's determined by the age-appropriate assessments that are done on their skills. the importance of appropriate transition goals. So having appropriate transition goals and objectives prior to the completion of 12th grade is critical to ensure that the school district and the parents understand the students' transition needs. I'm sort of overemphasizing it, but it's very important to have this set, to have this, to be proactive about this. When a child's a senior, this district tends to like to graduate students as quickly as possible. And they are only obligated, once they graduate a child, they have no obligation to further educate their child or provide transition services. So it's very important that you know what's going to happen after 12th grade. It's very important that everybody's on the same page, that your child's not going to graduate, or, you know, in the unusual case, sometimes kids are able to, if they've gotten the appropriate training and they've acquired the appropriate skills and achieve the goals. But many times you're going to a transition program and the district is responsible to provide that programming through the age of 21. Many students, like I said, are graduated too early, and they don't have the skills. They haven't achieved the goals that are set out in their transition program or in their IEP. And, you know, this is what we're trying to avoid here, and you have legal rights to that. So try to, you know, really focus and figure out and be on the same page with the IEP team. Try to work collaboratively as much as possible to figure out what your child, what it's going to look like in 12th grade and what the transitioning program looks like. Okay, so COVID threw a monkey wrench into everything, right? It's really impacted our lives quite a bit. And the way COVID came in, it prevented a lot of opportunity. And I should go back and just give examples of transition programming. So, you know, sometimes there could be a vocational goal that is set for transition. And it could say something like, you know, after graduation, Judy, that's me, will work 25 hours or more, you know, per week at the local pharmacy with the assistance of vocational rehabilitation. So the corresponding IEP goal in the IEP should be something like, I don't know, you know, given a whole task instruction and a task analysis for restocking shelves at the pharmacy. I will demonstrate, or Judy will demonstrate, the steps in the task analysis with 80% accuracy, or something to that effect. So let's say COVID happens, and it did. This sort of training, which maybe part of it was to actually be on-site training, where I could spend, you know, some time in a pharmacy, you know, showing how I progressed and how that was going, was not afforded to me because of the shutdown during COVID. Perhaps certain services like social skills therapy or group instruction was not available because everything stopped during COVID, or perhaps it was provided through video, through remote instruction, but your child was unable to access it. So this really became a problem. Now, the law stayed the same, basically. The federal, during the shutdown, the physical shutdown of school buildings during COVID, there was federal guidance that was issued. And basically it said that school districts aren't alleviated from their obligation to provide students with disabilities FAPE, the free appropriate public education. They just, under the circumstances, we have a little bit of a different standard, that they need to ensure that students with disabilities are provided FAPE to the greatest extent possible. Okay, so they had to do their best in providing the services and the access to community programming. Now, just to give you a little background and so that you know your rights, FAPE is at minimum the special education related services identified in the IEP, right? That was developed under IDEA, or a plan developed under Section 504, including the transition plan. So the guidance further provided that when school buildings reopened, right, like when this mess finally ends, the team will get together and look at your child and determine whether compensatory services are needed to ensure that a free appropriate public education is provided. And this is where, you know, it gets a little complicated. We're talking about something called compensatory education. So they're going to look at your child and they're going to say, okay, They weren't provided this therapy or this instruction or this programming or this community program because of COVID, and what needs to be done to put them in the same place that they would have been but for COVID and the denial of access to this programming. So compensatory education is what provides that. Now, to place the student in the purpose, like I said, is to place the student in the position he or she would otherwise be in, but for the denial of FAPE. It's an equitable remedy. This is very important. It's in addition to the special education and related services that the student would otherwise receive. It's a determination that's on an individual basis. And it doesn't, what's really important about this is that it doesn't require a finding of negligence or fault on the part of the school district. It's not anybody's fault that COVID happened, obviously. This is just something that happened, and the student was not provided access to their program, not for a failure or for the district or any other programming source being negligent. So compensatory education is indicated when there's a failure to receive the direct instruction or the supports or the programming, which is what we went over. And if the student was provided virtual live instruction, as I mentioned, but they were unable to access it or meaningfully participate in it for whatever reason, they were unable to focus and pay attention. They had there's a combination of reasons, students with ADHD, autism, a number of reasons. And I think this is less relevant, but packets, websites, and teacher check-ins are not direct instruction in order to provide FAPE under the law. What's very important is that if you do think that during this time period that your child is not making progress and they're not being provided the services and the programming that's in their IEP, it's very important and on a practical side to keep data on this. And that's sort of a formal way of saying, take notes, note any regression in skills, keep tabs on what services were provided, what weren't, and the quality of service. If it was virtual, how accessible was it for your child? If it was a training, the fact that, most of the off-campus, any kind of programming that took place off-campus or out of the home was just basically, it just didn't happen for a very long time. And those are crucial services and programming in transition, for transition purposes. So it's to be vigilant and to keep notes and to keep track of this is very important. Now, graduation and aging out. So I already talked about when it's time to graduate, and schools like to graduate kids as soon as possible. Districts like to graduate this as soon as graduate kids as soon as possible, and to try to avoid that, to make sure that your child has received the programs and the services and the interventions and instruction that that the district is required to provide in order to provide FAPE. And that includes those specific programs in the IEP, already in the IEP. And it's to make sure that they have the skills and the ability to transition into whatever goal, post-secondary or vocational goal that they may have, or other type of goal that they may have, and that they're able to generalize the skills and what they've learned. So many transition programs with community-based instruction, as well as in-school special education services, as I noted, were not provided due to COVID. That it's very important that you request delay of graduation and put this in writing. So in writing, due to the fact that, these community-based programs and special ed services and instruction were not provided during COVID, your child has not achieved their goals. They've not acquired the skills that they need in order to proceed through and after transition. So first thing is to request the delay of graduation, request the compensatory education that can be, that should be provided. And this is very important. So legally, the law states that the district's obligated to provide for the education, the community-based instruction and the special ed through the age of 21. So what happened in this last year for kids who turned 21? Well, they were graduating, they were aging out. More, even more alarming was that they were aging out, where the district didn't have any responsibility to provide anything, including comp ed, Although there, you can request comp ed after graduation and after 21 in certain circumstances. But this was an area that once they went beyond 21, they weren't going to be provided their full programming that they had missed because of COVID. So check your state's laws. If anything new has come down the pike, your advocacy organizations, your groups, to see if in your state they have addressed this issue. In New Jersey, where I practice, they have. They passed a bill that provides for special education and related services to certain students exceeding the age of 21. And that was just signed into law in June. So it's really, really important to check your individual state law on this.
Judith, can I ask a quick question that came in? This is from Montana, a state we seldom hear from. She says, this past legislative season, families and advocates fought hard to get education through age 20. You said states can provide more than is federally stipulated, but not less. Is Montana the only state not educating through age 21?
It's yeah, I mean, the law is that it's when you're 21. When you're 21, you age out. I should have made that clearer. So when you turn 21, you age out.
When you may turn like your birthday 21 or the
Exactly.
end of age 21? Your birthday
Your
21.
birth date, yes. That's actually very important. I'm glad that was clarified. It's your birth date.
Okay. All right. Then it seems like Montana is in compliance because she says it's through age 20.
Right.
Like
I'm
end
sorry.
of age
I
20,
said through 21. Sorry. That's correct. It's
Through age 20.
It's to your 21st birthday.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Thank you.
Now,
Judith.
if you turn 21 in the school year, you finish the school year. Does that make sense? In other words, if like your birthday's in February, it just doesn't stop in February. You go through to June. It's
and is that a federal law or is that state?
It's the interpretation of the federal law.
It's the interpretation. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That makes more sense. And I hope that she can take that back to Montana.
So it's the completion of the academic year, the year you turn 21.
Okay. Thank you, Judith.
You're welcome. Okay. And I think that is the end of my part until I come back later. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Satriali. Satriel, sorry.
All right. We need Gloria to unmute. There she goes.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm trying to, oh, wait a minute.
There you are.
Do you see me?
We do. We see your
Okay.
screen.
Let me see if I can, I don't see my PowerPoint though, which would be helpful. So let's see if we can do this again. Oh, what happened? Did I need to start to share?
If you are manipulating your own slides, you start to share. Otherwise, Judith can put the slides back up and she can advance them.
Well, I would prefer to do it myself. So
okay. Well, hopefully you can find them.
Yeah, just let's see. Give me a minute to see if I can get, I don't understand why the PowerPoint went away. But
everyone go get coffee, do some jumping jacks.
Yeah, right. Sorry about the technical piece here.
If there's any questions, I can also.
Oh, that is also true.
There
there aren't any questions in the chat, but if anybody has anything, now would be a good time. Very true. I don't see anything coming in yet.
Do you see it now?
I do. It's in presenter mode, but I see it.
Oh, well, we don't want that, do we?
Oh, where'd it go?
Yeah, I thought we really just had to, whoops.
Why are you doing it?
Trying to find the PowerPoint again. Well, if I can't.
Okay.
Nope, that's
I have some questions for Judith.
Good.
Miss Vintro, is this you, Judith from Parles Rekem? Yes, it is. Can you clarify school services are provided until age 21? I thought it was 22. Did this just change in June? Judy just answered that. So I don't think I'll have her repeat it, but she said, if you turn 21 in the school year, you don't just leave school the day you turn 21, you stay on till the end of the school year. When does vocational rehab begin versus the school covering goals related to career development? Judy?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
When does voc rehab begin versus the school covering goals related to career development?
It's both. The vocational rehab. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not true. It starts at 21. You can there are programs that do vocational training and vocational rehabilitation that they combine the program. So it's the IEP goals are through, in addition, sorry, this is getting confusing, in addition to the vocational rehab. So if you have a vocational goal, then the IEP has to have specific goals of what skills or what needs to be achieved in order to reach that goal. And probably Gloria can answer that as well.
I think she's busy figuring out her slides, but
do you guys not see it? Do you guys not see my slides?
yeah,
now?
it's still in presenter mode.
Yeah.
You could
go to the bottom of the right. Do you see like a little slide?
There
we go.
Is it fixed now?
Yes, yeah, I think so.
That's good.
Yeah, well, it's fixed for you, but not fixed for me. I don't, it was so perfect before. Of course, I don't know what happened. So I guess I'm just going to not have it in presenter mode for you. And I'm going to wing it without my notes. So there we go. Are we good to start with?
You are good to go.
We're good.
Yeah, and we'll get to more questions afterwards, but go ahead, Gloria.
Okay, so perfect. So where the rubber really meets the road, right, is to translate all of these legal mandates, to translate all of the guidance that the law has into actual application. And that's where it becomes really sticky. And on the left side of your screen, you can see that actual federal regulation that Judy had on her slide before that talks about instruction, related services, community experiences, the development of employment, and other post-school adult living objectives. Lots of educators translate this into checklists and into plans and to other kinds of documents. And frankly, educators are given blanket authority without, some strong guidance and direction from parents and advocates and the rest of the team. They kind of, develop, these goals, measurable or not, in this pro forma way has been my experience. And if you're not actually doing something with these goals, if you're not actually doing something with the instruction, the community experiences, you're really just checking things off the list. And you have to really become familiar with what really transition is and what it is not, and to not be led astray by statements that, well, this is your transition plan and this is the checklist and we're going to, check everything off as we go along. You have to do a much deeper dive into what is that overall transition outcome that you're trying to achieve. And in my world, the overall transition outcome that you're trying to achieve is what happens if your child is left alone? Could they survive? It's a whole Home Alone movie moment. And that's why we kind of start, and it's not setting the bar low, it's setting the bar where we need to begin, which is, can we feed ourselves? Can we dress ourselves? Can we productively and meaningfully engage ourselves? What would happen if the help doesn't show up, or if the help is incompetent or asleep or whatever? Because let's face it, when we're talking about our population, our subset of the autism population that has very intense needs and are profoundly and severely affected, We're talking about kids who need lots of supports. So our job in transition is to arrange all of the contingencies, no matter what domain area we're talking about: meal prep, vocation, skills of daily living, community living, whatever domain we're in. Have we arranged all of those contingencies? Have we figured out the support and the scaffolding that's necessary to make the 70-30, 60-40 combination percentage to 100% ability to survive, and then let's hope thrive? So we look at transition from a baseline expectation of that. Let's start there. And how do we, now my slides are not advancing, and how do we arrange those contingencies to be in a situation where we are doing better than what the current post-secondary outcomes are, and they are very dismal. If you Google the Drexel University National Longitudinal Transition Study, there's lots and lots and lots of information there. And many of the things that I'm going to talk about today, the resources, are at the end in a frame where when NCSA posts the PowerPoint, you can download that, you can click on those resources, and you'll get all of the documents and you'll get all of the resources. But this study tells you right now that we're not doing clinically a good job of meeting the federal mandate. My favorite statistic here is not so much that 74% of individuals want to work but can't, or 74 again worked less than 20 hours per week, or that 85% are still living at home with aging parents. My favorite statistic is 78% still don't know what to do about it, unfamiliar with the agencies or other resources that can help increase a better outcome. How did we get to these numbers? Well, we got to these numbers because I think that post 2004, when IDEA was reauthorized and we made the shift legally from school to work, because most educational programs were really focused on that job, right? And while a job is a necessary component of quality of life, it's not singularly sufficient. There's all kinds of other stuff that goes into making what is that adult life going to be. But we haven't had that focus. Our transition programs haven't been appropriately connected to that federal mandate of an outcome of quality of life. Our transition programs haven't been intensive enough in terms of the instruction that is afforded. Staff training is always an ongoing issue that requires our attention. And lack of a lifelong learning hierarchy, right? Meaning that, yes, you age out or you graduate, then what's next? The statistics also have to do with the fact that once the school bus stops coming, generally learning ceases, and that's not appropriate for any individual in this world, right? We're all lifelong learners in some respect. The lack of community access has been a problem and continues to be key. The federal law talks about community opportunities and experiences, and community means outside in the world, how to integrate, how to transport to it, and how to live within it, housing. So lack of quality of life and all of the components that go into that as an overall transition outcome, I think has been part of the issue that we can't seem to get the focus on transition correct. Why can I not advance these? Okay. Then, as Judy talked about, add in that COVID barrier and the regressions and the need for compensatory education, the lack of meaningful engagement because we're no longer one-to-one. And again, for our subset of the population, generally speaking, virtual classrooms and learning are just not going to cut it. And yes, we had to all do the best we could do, but if in my opinion, and Judy, jump in here, if you are a member of the severely affected population and all you had was virtual experiences or check-in, check-ins, you're entitled to compensatory education. You're entitled to delay graduation. And again, for our population, graduation certainly does not happen before 21. Loss of staff, health and safety concerns, nowhere to transition to, all of those barriers combined with the personal barriers that we continue to experience in terms of as a parent having, simply wearing too many hats. There's too many things that we're responsible to do. And all of those things are very hard. I always say that a kid who is receiving special education is subjected to joint custody, right? Because it's the team approach. And everybody gets a say in what's best. That's all very hard, and it impinges upon our privacy, and for me at least created lots of fear. Transition for me was the worst post-diagnosis experience that I could have. And as a parent, to do all of those things and understand that independent ability and pushing that doesn't mean that I don't love him and I don't want to do things for him. It was always pointed out to me how I baby my babies, and while that's okay when we're talking about the kid with autism, it's really not okay because we're talking about the rest of their life and being able to consistently understand what the rules are in terms of instruction. So that generalization and our personal push to implement some of those things at home so that there's a consistency of expectation makes all of this practically impossible. So what do all of those things mean? It means that we have to focus on transition as an on-site or community experience, whether it's job coaching or otherwise, to focus on what those quality of life considerations are and how we're going to achieve those things, no matter what domain we're talking about, daily living skills, community living skills. And it's a multi-year process. This is not a destination, it's a journey. And as Judy pointed out, transition, look it up in the dictionary, transition is a lifelong thing. There are transitions happening all throughout an individual's life, all throughout their educational experience. It's not this magic birth date of 16 nationally or 14 in Pennsylvania, but that's when the focus is really going to start. But I would suggest to you, if you can get into transition mode as a regular part of your educational experience, you're going to do yourself a favor. Judy mentioned that how do we achieve this? We achieve this through assessing strengths and weaknesses through assessments. Be careful here, because of course there are formalized assessments, all kinds of formalized assessments. It doesn't mean anything unless it's individualized to your child's specific needs and strengths. It doesn't matter if they don't apply the assessment uniquely to your individual child. And I would suggest to you that there are very few formalized assessments that can do that, and they should be guidelines only, and not to put all your eggs in the basket of some assessment that tells you what the present levels are. Present levels are determined by what you see and what you experience, not a score on a test. All of this stuff is discussed in meetings that are attended by all the mandated representatives. Those mandated representatives, of course, differ state to state, but I would suggest to you, if you can get the people on the adult side to participate, which is nearly impossible, but that's the goal, and that's something you should strive for, because they know who you are early on, they know what the needs are early on, and maybe, just maybe in transition, they can translate that into some post-education services. Those measurable, observable, and data-driven goals we're going to talk a little bit more about, because that is always a moving target as well. But being able to develop a regular system to assess that, whether that's through, IEP meetings are once a year. It's not enough. We meet in my program monthly. Is that a huge response effort? Yes. Does it keep our finger on the pulse of exactly what's going on and what changes we need to make? Yes. So it moves the process along in a dynamic and organic fashion that changes what you're teaching in accordance with the progress that's being made. And all of this has to be realistic and attainable. There's nothing that aggravates me and upsets me more. And I just had to go through it yesterday in Pennsylvania. In order to qualify for adult services, you have to be reassessed soup to nuts every 5 years. And it commences with this assessment that is frankly kind of, I don't know, I have no words for it. It talks to me about how would, what do I want for my son in terms of, being able to be married and have children? You know what, like, this is off the table. Stop asking me about this. He's not going to be an astronaut. We're not talking about Supreme Court justice. So stop asking me about these things and stop asking me, what am I doing about furthering his ability to make a choice to do that? But that's what we have to do in Pennsylvania. I personally want to look to something that's realistic and attainable and valuable to him in his world. When I talk about him in his world, I want to talk about him in his world. I don't want to talk about the vacuum of 9 to 3, which is usual school hours. I need to understand all of the resources that are available to him, all of the interests that he may have, and all of the things that are going to impact his life, like where he lives, what society at large has to say about inclusion of an individual as profoundly affected as he is and need intensive resources and supports. What are his coworkers like? What are the resources I can bring to the table? What are his personal choices, which are huge? So to put all of that in perception versus reality, please try to stick with what is most realistic based upon your child's needs and wants. Autism is a lifelong pervasive diagnosis for which there is no cure. I feel like keeping that at the forefront helps me get the intensive services that are going to be necessary. It's difficult to understand what the reality really is because in the transition process, we do not know what adult services are going to be on the table. So we have to make plans for plan A, plan B, plan C, D, and E, dependent upon what the funding is going to be. And they don't tell us what the funding is going to be. So from a parent perspective, oh, look, there's little animation going on. It's really hard. It's really hard for us. So I would say we need to start with what are our priorities. One would hope we are being asked at the very beginning of the process, what do we see life being for our child? What resources do we have? What resources do we expect? How do those things impact what we think we can and cannot achieve? Because if you don't start there in kind of a backward chain, right? Let's write the conclusion. Let's write the end of the story. And then identify all of the things we need to put into place to get there. We have a parent priority and parent vision checklist, which you can access at the end of the presentation, that serves to kind of assist you in thinking about all of the things that you have to think about. Grooming, activities of daily living, making friends, socializing, domestic chores, time management, behavioral kinds of stuff. The list goes on and on and on and on. And if you don't kind of do a deep dive into what the many things are and what you value most, because time is very short, particularly if you're in a district who you weren't on top of the idea that they must start no later than 16, and all of a sudden you're 18. You've lost a couple of years. I have districts that say, no, we're too young to start vocational planning. No, we're too young to go out into the community. It is mandated at 16. And we need time because we know the literature tells us that individuals with autism require repeated opportunities for practice in order to achieve some level of competency, much less mastery or fluency. So before we can go about training all of these things within the limited time that we have, what are the things that are most valuable? What is of social significance to you and to your community around you? And that's what that parent vision and priority checklist starts with. We then dump that all into a transition planning tool. And that tool follows every meeting, every benchmark, every progress, every regression It has timeframes in there that, again, backward chains things from aging out at 21. Okay, I'm 18. I've got 3 years. How do I whack up that 3 years? What do I need to have done? How much time can I afford to spend in each area, et cetera? And this is a living, dynamic, organic document that is amended every time something happens or there's a meeting. We actually even color code it so that we know what comments and what changes were made according to what date. Again, it's pretty extensive and it's available to you by clicking on the link at the end of the PowerPoint. So how do we get from here, all of the documents, all of the visions, all of the promises, all of the meetings to actually there, a destination of a quality of life? There's lots of components to getting there. Transition planning is that piece that's in the middle. And then we have to go around and look at natural environment training and community-based instruction. And I would suggest to you, try to go back to the literature, right? Because the literature tells us that individuals with autism learn best where the behavior is most likely to be displayed. That means I should be doing it under natural circumstances because it's going to be naturally in my behavioral chain, as opposed to other things that could come into that aren't naturally occurring because it's contrived. Now, many places have not been able to catch up with the transition in the education, the shift in the educational paradigm from school to work to school to quality of life and all of the things that that means. In other words, there are lots of field trips, but not lots of places that actually teach and train in the community in true community-based instruction. So we have to start somewhere. Something's better than nothing. Certainly push for community-based, but if you can't get community-based, you at least want to have some ability to be in the made-up kitchen, to be in the made-up store. Certainly a real kitchen in a real house for real life skills planning is the best, but we have to do something to teach these skills in as close to a natural circumstance as possible. We want to make sure that whatever we are instructing is instructed with sufficient intensity of instruction. That means you're tracking the frequency and the duration. How many times is it happening? How often is it happening? And if the data is strong and we are acquiring these skills, you can shorten the duration or maybe shorten the frequency to free up time to train in other aspects. Everything that we do, we are very vested in the literature about ABA that talks to us about 30 years of implementing instruction that is data-based, that is objective, that's observable, that is socially significant, that's in context. So you want to look at ABA, the application of ABA principles. You want to make sure that there is choice, competency, and control and dignity that overshadows everything that's going on in the transition plan. Of course, it needs to be functional. That's why functional is right, below transition planning as use technology and environmental adaptations as much as you can to advance your ability to teach more with less. Community partnerships to go out there into the community and forge alliances to allow for more opportunities. Remember that there's not a whole lot of one-to-one when you get in the adult world. So maybe you want to look to reliance on natural supports and integrating natural supports into your educational plans and training in dyads and triads. And the communication is key, and it needs to be often, and it's central to the team planning. And that process just continues on and on and on in a multi-year fashion according to that process that we just talked about, using the assessments, using the surveys in terms of your vision, identifying those outcomes, putting them into goals, and Judy gave you some examples of goals. The devil is in the details. It's not just a goal of competitive employment without support, which really isn't an appropriate goal for our population. I'm not sure why that's there. But what does that actually mean and what does it translate to? It's not just independent living. What does it translate to? What am I training in? Am I training in pedestrian safety, public transportation, shopping, money skills? The devil is in the detail, and the detail has to be accounted for. So the accountability, unfortunately, as parents, we're always at the helm. We're the sentinel at the gate. The fox is watching the hen house at times, and that can't be. So we're the people who need to be understanding and communicating and making sure that there is accountability for progress in those goals.
I'll just add there too, Gloria, that it's really important that communicating is very, very important in writing. We have a saying in our office, I think Lisa started it, that if it's not written, it never happens. So, I think that it, you know, just to, my video wasn't working for a second. So just to emphasize that constant communication, you know, making sure, being vigilant and making sure that they're providing what they're supposed to be providing, and communicating that in writing is very important. So
if it isn't in writing, it didn't exist.
Right, it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. If it isn't in writing, your staff, your teachers, your support professionals don't know what to follow, right? Mm-hmm. There's lots of programs that they have the goals, they have the IEP, and that's it. All of this needs to be written down and task analyzed and broken down into the smallest incremental bits of instruction, so that there is we call them an IP, an instructional plan to follow for each and every aspect of what you're training. So from a clinical standpoint, if it isn't in writing, they have nothing to guide them and they can't be held responsible. And from a legal standpoint, nobody's going to be held responsible if it isn't in writing. So that is an excellent, excellent point. You're building a record. You must build a record of what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, what didn't happen, and now what needs to happen, whether that's post 21 or not. Because if you wake up a couple of months before aging out at 21 or at the end of that academic school year, and you come to find that all of the things that they said that they were going to do never happened, we're jumping ahead to the end of the presentation, there's still things you can do, still things that you must do. You want to be sure that you're not just getting stuck on all of the obvious things that education has historically been focused on. Money skills, I don't even know what that means anymore, because I don't know how much cash you have in your wallet, but I have this little plastic card and that's all I have. So, and if I know that a quarter is a quarter, but I don't know that I need two of them to buy a gumball, why am I wasting this time, right? So what's relevant today, or what was relevant yesterday, isn't relevant today. And it may be relevant today globally, but maybe it isn't relevant in your little piece of the world. So we have to be really specific about what we're teaching, even if it's the obvious and usual stuff. And I would suggest to you that you need to expand to some of the not so obvious stuff. If my coping mechanism, because the bus didn't show up exactly on time, because I am very routinized, is that I'm going to bang my head against, you know, the bus bench, not cool. I need other coping mechanisms. So in transition, as soon as we've learned something, I now have to teach you to deal with it if it doesn't happen exactly as you expect it to be. That's the next step in the learning process. We have to have an understanding of the community culture of the community in which we're going to immerse ourselves. And any education that needs maybe to happen there, to bring them along, to buy them in, right? We teach our community that they're helping us save lives. And they believe it. And they believe it because it's true. And you know what? When you save a life, it feels really good. And the community digs that when you set it up the right way. But it's a lot of work and it's a lot of pre-planning. Happiness is an objective, measurable construct that we can teach. So when your educators tell you happiness is not something that belongs in an IEP because we're talking about deficit areas. Well, yeah, technically true, but you're talking about autism here. We have a problem with affect. We have a problem with choice making. We have a problem with being able to do these things. So we need to keep our finger on the pulse, not only on the things in terms of in vivo preference assessments, continuing formal and informal preference assessments, the ability to have choice and competency and control over your own life and existence. All of that must be infused into educational programming because those things must be systematically taught to individuals with autism, and they are key to any person's quality of life. Just look at, the hundreds of years literature and a billion dollar industry to increase happiness for typically developing individuals, right? We not only can figure out how to systematically increase those indices of happiness once we identify them on a unique, idiosyncratic, individualized scale for each individual, but we can also identify what they don't like. And when we decrease instances and exposures of aversive kinds of things, we're automatically increasing happiness. So in my world, happiness and positive affect is something that we need to track in order for us to understand in transition what are the appropriate sensory, production, navigation, social matches, right? You got to get to the root of who the person is to be able to understand those matches, to be able to develop their life in their world. Sexual safety and all kinds of safety, sexual safety included. Confidence, it's interesting to hear a scientist talk about things that are not observable, but confidence can be observable if you observe affect. This is my choice slide, right? You can't even get a cup of coffee in this world without the mocha, latte, half calf, sweetened, unsweetened. Like the number of choices that we make, we should be like a kid in the candy store in terms of the opportunities that we're giving. It's not, do you want apples? Do you want a red apple? Do you want a white apple? Do you want the apple whole? Do you want it sliced? Maybe you don't want an apple at all. Maybe it's applesauce that you like. These choices and the ability to make choices are at the root of quality of life. And if you continue to think of transition and the skills that the federal law mandates be taught connected to quality of life, that is a transition plan that you're on. And remember, when you identify those things that you want to teach, there's all kinds of things that go into that. Each one of these things that I'm talking about are kind of webinars on their own. So this is just kind of an overview. We can't dig deep into it, except to say that if you don't know, if your staff doesn't know, ask the teacher or the para one day, hey, why are we doing this? And if they don't know, or if it's just because it's in the IEP or their supervisor told them to do it, then they don't have sufficient investment or knowledge of what they're doing. They don't understand the rationale, and you end up with teaching the wrong skills well is no better than teaching the right skills poorly. We've got to know what we're doing, no matter what it is that we are doing, and we've got to know to what level we're teaching it. I mentioned before, is it mastery? Is it proficiency? Is it fluency? People tend to stop when they, say, oh, well, he's got that. Well, is he going to maintain it? And does he do it fluently enough to be able to do it in the real world? Does the real world expect a normative rate? These are all things that you have to think about, because these are the things that the real world is asking, particularly if you're talking about vocation and a job. So think about all of the skills that you want to teach, no matter what domain they are in the frame of in order to. I've been talking about in order to for I don't know how many decades, but it tickled me half to death in 2014 when Pennsylvania changed their forms to be filled in with in order to. ISP outcomes now talk about in order to. Well, in order to what? Isn't that the $64,000 question? And I begin with that question here. The ultimate test of functionality, which is our home alone assessment. If the student does not learn to do this task, will someone else have to do it for them? Will your child forever be destined to be sentenced to a life of dependency on somebody else if I don't teach this? That's where I got to start, right? I would suggest to you that tying shoes is not one of them. Tying shoes has been in IEPs since the Stone Age, and that goal continues year after year. there are very hip shoes. In fact, the hippest of the kids don't wear sneakers that have the ties are there. They look like they're tied sneakers, but they're slip-ons. So they're not the old people Velcro thingies, right? There are very hip things that you can put in place of some of these really realistically in the real world skills that are not necessary, right? So I ask you, though, if you're thinking about this, would it be necessary then to learn how to brush your teeth? And every time I ask this question, I get a lot of, well, yes, of course. I mean, you know, and the answer is no. It's kind of sort of a trick question, but not really. It's a question to try to drive you into the end game, to drive you into that thought pattern and process of what really matters and what is really of value and what's the quickest way around the autism barrier to get there, because it isn't about learning to brush your teeth. There are 75 discrete steps in a task analysis to brushing your teeth. Do you have sufficient attention? Do you have sufficient fine motor skills? It's not necessary, right? To learn how to brush your teeth, because the end game is clean teeth. The end game is proper hygiene. And are there other things that I can do to shorten that process? There's a bunch of stuff out there in the world, environmental adaptations like the 30-second smile, the Colas curve, toothbrushes that break those 75 steps down into 5 or 6. And now they even have plates out. There are plates that you press the button, it automatically fills with toothpaste. You put the plates in your mouth, it buzzes, you take them out, as opposed to 75 steps. So you want to focus on the end game, right? But sometimes, no matter how much you teach, and we do believe that it's not their inability to learn, it's our inability to yet figure out the best way to teach and what's most appropriate. But sometimes it isn't about that. Sometimes it's about slide. Yo, there we go. You see this guy? He's physically incapable of jumping into the middle of mommy's bed. The middle of mommy's bed is nirvana. That's where he de-escalates. That's where he's happy, right? But unless you adapt the environment in order to give him the independent ability to access that choice, access that preference, access that necessity. Oh, do you need to go outside? You let him out. Oh, are you hungry? And then the dog is biting you, right? Because you haven't removed as many variables as you can to give him independent access to the things that he needs most. And sometimes we have to adapt the environment, whether it's taking the buttons off a shirt and putting snaps in place, or maybe that's an appropriate place for Velcro, the shoes I talked about before, or my favorite, that little plastic credit card. The only social interaction necessary in the independent purchase of what I value most, my Diet Coke and cheese curls, is debit or credit. The cashier has to program the register. She doesn't need to know, how are you today? She doesn't need to know, did you find everything okay? Those would be nice. That's proficiency. But I might be at a spot where I just need survival. So maybe I need a prompt if I'm verbal to look down and say, credit, please. Maybe I'm entirely nonverbal and I'm taught to flip the card over and point credit, please. Cashier knows what cashier needs to do. I now put my card in and I've independently accessed with dignity, somebody not doing it for me, my Diet Coke and my cheese curls. All of these things are examples of environmental adaptations that help us do the things that we need to do in life. Technology. Technology is not a silver bullet. Technology isn't the be all and end all. Technology, by the way, is not just the sexy little devices like our iPhone. Technology really is that creative process. Behavior analytic procedures, ABA, is a technology, right? But we think about technology, we think about our iPhones, and like every other teenager out there in the world, it's like oxygen. And I would suggest to you that it's an assistive technology. Districts fight paying for iPhones and they fight for paying for plans, but they are just as valuable as Dynavoxes. They are more valuable than Dynavoxes because they are naturally accepted in the world, and any person in the community knows how to program them and knows how to help you with them. So we contain most of what we do in iPhones, PDAs, other pieces of technology. And you can take all of this programming and all of this instruction and put it into, in some fashion, whether it's via the pictures, via text, via video, to demonstrate what needs to be done. So we have a schedule. At the schedule, it's time to make lunch. You click on make lunch, it flips you into a pre-preference assessed menu of the meals that we're learning to make right now. You tap make salad, and it takes you into the task analysis of being able to make a salad, with the idea of you independently being able to follow something else, not a person, and not a person doing it for you, to increase your independent ability to do what you need at the time you need to do it. I'm going to show you what it looks like in application, but you should know that Liz, who you're about to see, came to my program at 20 years of age. And most of the time she was permitted to sit in her rocking chair, listen to her music. If you asked Liz to do something, somebody was liable to get hurt, and it wasn't Liz. She had 2 men assigned to her at the time she came to my program. And this is about 18 months. Oops, wait a second. Oh, don't tell me that the video is not going to work. This is going to make me very sad. It went away. Somehow.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry too.
Yeah, I don't see a video popping up.
It was here on the screen just a second ago, and it may have something to do with the fact that I couldn't get my slides in the form that I needed them to see.
Okay.
Need you guys to see them. Well,
Well, carry on best you can. Sorry.
Yes. Yep. I'm sorry you're not going to get to see that. But if you go to the PAL program website, which is just www.palprogram.org, most of these videos are there. And you will be able to see that the technology is taking Liz through every she needs to. It started out at about 36. She's down to about 5 or 6 at this point. And you chain all of these things together, whether it's making a salad or brushing your teeth or making your bed or doing your vocational, doing your job opportunity. You chain all of these things together and you begin to have an independent ability to carry through your day and your life, because using these things really isn't independence, it's interdependence. We are all interdependent on something. If I didn't have my timer to get up in the morning, my GPS to get where I needed to go, the list to go to the store, the recipe to cook, all of these things are really the resources that we need to make a task, make us be able to do a task by ourselves. We talked about intensity of teaching, and whatever you're teaching, you need to do it often enough so that you actually have the repetition to have mastery. Dr. Peter Gerhardt, if you don't know him, he is the key and the king, in my opinion, on adult services and transition. If you Google him, YouTube him, there's a lot of presentations on transition planning and transition skills. But he tells us, when we were doing those discrete trial things, those of us who did do that, and we're doing color identification, well, we did 300 trials of that, right? And if you had didn't have that sufficiency of intensity with what you were doing in terms of, let's say, going to McDonald's and purchasing your meal, if you were only doing it once every other week, it would take like 6 years of instruction if you don't have the same intensity of instruction as you do on other things when you're talking about community-based instruction. So make sure you limit your IEP goals. Make sure that there's only 5 to 7 is my suggestion, because that allows for the intensity of teaching. But then, of course, that means that you can't have one IEP meeting per year. because you're going to continually roll through these things as you acquire them and replace them with other things. The American Psychological Association had published a paper that talked about, on average, you need at least 3 opportunities a week of doing whatever it is that you're doing to promote sufficient skill acquisition. Make sure that you do these things across all environments, home, school, and community. And when you're talking about individuals with autism who have issues with generalization, yes, school, you are obligated to ensure generalization of skill acquisition across all of these environments. I don't know if, Judy, you have any guidance on that.
Sometimes families come and they think that it's very segregated, those environments, and that they can't get services in the home. And it really, that's not accurate, that the law provides for those, for crossing over into all environments, so that you're reinforcing whatever you're teaching and whatever's being trained and whatever practice and generalizing of skills is occurring. So it's done in the home, the same, in other words, for example, behavioral interventions, they're done in the home, they're done at school, they're done in the workplace, all through all these environments, throughout all these environments.
Jill, I'm going to ask you if there are any questions in the chat, because I have realized, I think, the problem. This is not the right PowerPoint. So if I can answer a question while I'm getting the right PowerPoint up, maybe we'll be able to see some of the things that I had wanted you guys to see.
Maybe I can find it on mine. Hold on.
Well, while we sort out the appropriate slide deck, I will chat with you guys with some of these questions. Okay, there are quite a number of them in chat. I did want to say something about the age. People wrote in about the age at which school ends. I think that Michigan ends at 26, for example, just to give an example of other states having different age limits. Judy would know more about that than I do. Okay, if you guys are able to listen, when does vocational rehab begin versus the, oh, no, we did that one. Is there a baseline for compensatory services, or does it just need to be agreed upon? I think you addressed that, Judy, in your talk.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for the, Gloria, I might have, because I opened it up, so I might have the correct, and I might be able to get the video. But
Are you guys seeing the slides now? Because I have the correct presentation up.
Yeah, yes, with your notes.
Oh, you're seeing the notes again. Dag nabbit. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah. Is there a baseline for compensatory services, or does it just need to be agreed upon? I think.
Well, it's not about agreeing upon. It's that if your child, well, the easiest example for that is if your child was not provided a specific service or a specific, let's say he or she was supposed to go to the pharmacy. Let's take that example again. Supposed to go to the pharmacy to practice applying their skills and training 2 times a week for 2 hours. Okay. And they weren't able to do that at all during COVID through no one's fault. So the easiest way to do that is just to replace 1 for 1, that he or she wasn't able to do that. So you would add in the compensatory education would be 2 hours a week, right? 2 times a week for 2 hours going to the pharmacy and making that up somehow, either in the following semester or when things opened up after COVID. Or you could, as Gloria was saying, that if there's another creative alternative that would allow that person to at least make some progress towards attaining those goals, then, you could do a simulated environment if that was, some kind of, to the greatest extent possible. So it gets a little more confusing. So if the program that's offered was a simulated environment, that's when, you really sort of have to pay close attention to what the progress is and if it's really effective or not. And if you find that they're not really making the progress they need to make, they're not acquiring the skills that they would have made in the actual environment, then the team looks at that and determines, okay, they didn't progress like they would have in the actual real-time environment, and therefore we're going to make that up by providing that. So by law, you're supposed to be in the place you would have been if you were provided the services that are in your IEP, in the way that it's supposed to be provided. So that's technically what the standard is. It's whatever was supposed to be provided. Now, what makes it a little more complicated is that it's not always one-to-one. It's not always like they didn't provide the services at all. It's that at some point they did provide services, but they weren't exactly the way they were supposed to be provided, or either the manner or the environment. And then the question is, was that effective? Was your child able to access the way they were providing it? And did they make progress? And that has to be assessed again. So it's not whether the team decides, okay, we'll decide to do this, but it's really about, has your child acquired, have they mastered, are they proficient, are they fluent in the skills that they need to move on, to proceed and attain those goals. And I would, just to reiterate, it's always good to keep notes, to, sometimes even video, whatever you have to document your child's progress is extremely helpful in the legal process if it has to come to that. I mean, it's also helpful in just communicating with the team anyway, right? Like, if you submit a video, sometimes I have parents do this, do this so that they can so it's so much easier. A video speaks, right? A picture speaks 1,000 words. So if you send in a video of your child struggling or not, how they're functioning, then that is documented evidence. It's helpful to show it to the team to get on the same page. It's also helpful legally in case the team does not get on the same page as to what your child needs.
So I'm going to fast forward the presentation to capitalize on that moment. We take exactly what Judy is referencing one step further. We actually make a videographic chronicle from day one to graduation. And each year, and we call that, the IEP video. So year one, of course, is baseline when you walked into the program, and then we see the progress that you've made. So, and that is codified in percentages, right? So we are, now 50%, 74%, whatever it is on each and every skill, whether that's meal prep, navigation, a job opportunity. That next year's video, the achievement becomes baseline. And then where did we see, where did we go from there? In the final year, we are going back to year one, and we're taking that baseline, and we're taking for each skill, and then we're taking where we ended up and putting those two together. Not only does that make a record, not only does that help keep the team on point, it also in adult services can do many things. One, it can justify the need for intensivity of adult supports if that becomes appropriate. What I find to be more appropriate use is transition to other programs, whether they're day programs or whatever the set of services are. The transitioning, the agency to which you are transitioning never seems to think that the individual is as capable of all the things that you say they are. They just don't believe it. And as Judy said, seeing it, it goes a long way to believing it. This is what it looks like.
Sit. What do you need? I want. Never mind. Never mind. I want to leave. I don't think so. I want. No one call. No, I want. You want to leave? You need to sit down and tell me. Enough. Sit, please.
Stop brushing middle. Smile, brush side. Brush side.
So the video was edited and you're not seeing the percentages. I'm not sure why. And you're not fully seeing the array of choices that are nicely arranged in the refrigerator for him to be able to select what he wants himself, as opposed to staff doing it for him in making the salad or making whatever meal. Yes, where are the little fairies who?
Salad or hoagie? So, hoagie or salad? Which one?
There you go, it'd be a better view now. But that's the, 30% support to the 70% ability to have the choice and quality to choose your own stuff, get it out of the refrigerator and make it yourself. Nikki has significant auditory processing issues, so you have to hang back and have significant latency for his responses. And to emphasize our previous note, all of the instruction for any of these pieces is all written down. Data is collected on all of it, and there are summaries of current levels of performance. But that videographic representation, that ability to actually see it in action, to understand what he can and cannot do, because the beginning of the video was targeted specifically because they wanted to take all of his behavioral supports away. This can send messages, as Judy said, in a way that the written paper cannot. The other thing that we do in the program is everyone graduates with one of these.
Hi, my name is Rick and I go to the Parles program. I have two different jobs there. My first job is working at the government services building. I work there 3 days a week for 12 hours a day. My first job is collecting and delivering the mail.
So you get the idea. I know we don't have, we're starting to run out of time, but the idea being that Riffy can do his own voiceover. We had to do voiceovers for other individuals. We're able to post these video resumes on YouTube and get, Chef Tom to call his friend and say, hey, do you have 2 seconds? I really need you to look at this for me because I need your help. I need to give this kid a job. And he can't have benefits unless he has a job, right? Because unless you actually have a check, you're not going to get a job coach. And when you talk to people that way, they become very invested. So you take all of these procedures that I was talking about in terms of the written IEP and the use of technology and the use of environmental adaptations, and you immerse yourself within the community. And what you're about to see here is where we want to end up. We want to end up in a place where we've transformed a quite autistic presentation of dependence into a presentation of independent ability to access and enjoy the community in a variety of lifelong activities, be it here at the fitness center or in church. We have goals in our IEPs that have to do with church or synagogue, because it's important to family members that their children be able to meaningfully participate, in service. So we've attended mass, we've attended synagogue so that we can program behavior. And that's what transition's all about. Identifying those priorities of what their life is going to be like according to the vision of the family who is going to support them, you know, as until we die. And then it's going to move on to whoever we've given that responsibility to. And this webinar isn't about this, but when you talk about guardianship, you want to codify all of this stuff into a life plan and have that life plan integrated into that order so that your visions and the supports that you know work are the things that any individual is mandated to assist in guardianship. But this is what this looks like. You're going to see it at baseline first, and then you're going to see given a little bit supports, given prompts and directions through what here was initially a watch because he liked to throw things. Now he uses his iPod on his shoulder just like everybody else. He can listen to the prompts and independently navigate his world. This particular world is a fitness activity, but it applies to anything. Whoops. Let's go back.
I know I could, but I can't type.
Okay.
Give a tag for me? Great, thank you.
He doesn't have someone what I affectionately refer to as up his butt. He's going into the men's locker room, not the family locker room. They knew who he was at the front desk. He's got his people, which we have to develop. Now, it's not the autism that's going to get people angry. It's going the wrong way on the track, right? People pay a lot of money for their membership, and who's this guy now going the wrong way on the track? Because he didn't look at the arrow. He didn't follow the naturally occurring prompts in the environment.
That's it.
He's not really attending to riding this bike. He kind of wants to be everywhere but.
To Disney World? To a plane?
Give him a little support and scaffolding with audio and visual prompts. There's video on the watch as well as instructions. Nick, follow the arrow. He's got music in between the prompts that he selected himself. This now looks like a more typical application of running around the track, and he's actually getting some exercise as opposed to slogging around the way he was before. The music ended, track all done, time for elliptical. Now, it may not be a negotiable that you need to exercise, right? You may need it for health considerations. We all know the push for that. Staff's all the way across the other end of the room, monitoring for safety, but not up his butt. It's the prompts that he's hearing in his ears, telling him what to do, when to do it. And as I said, it may not be a choice that you have to exercise, but you could choose which equipment. And we want to figure out which equipment he likes the best by attending to affect and taking data on the affect so that we can help to understand what he likes and what he doesn't like. If he had had staff at the small of his back guiding him every step of the way, because this was not programmed in the prompts, he never would have gotten that drink of water. But he saw the water fountain, he was thirsty, he stopped, he got the drink, as opposed to immediately being redirected to go downstairs because it was time for the bike. Now I'm riding the bike instead of just being told to do something. That was Bruce Springsteen, for those of you who couldn't properly translate. The data speaks volumes. You have a very dependent, erratic performance without the prompts and the scaffolding and the other supports that can transform that into a very independent ability to navigate your life and community and activity. So you chain all of that together and you have a day, you have a week, you have a month, you have a life, kind of happily too, because we've figured out what makes him happy and how to increase that happiness. I'm going to roll back real quick to see If there was anything else I wanted to really highlight to you, adaptive behavior is one of the things we like to highlight. And that is simply that ability to instinctively understand what the environment is expecting of you. You immediately know that reverence is expected when you enter a house of worship. That's not the same initial reaction you have if you're in the casino or in the bar. And yes, our adults go to casinos, they go to bars, they sing karaoke, because that's like life. Nikki, who you saw in both of those videos, had some pretty aggressive and difficult behaviors. He continues to do so. It doesn't mean that everything's fixed. It just means that we've been able to put certain things into place that helps him understand what's expected of him when, and to be able to get through that task. But attention in your transition plan to adaptive behavior is very important. Teaching individuals to understand what the environment is requesting of them in terms of their responses and their behavior. It isn't part of the diagnostic criteria of autism, but it is the hottest button issue clinically. For supports for individuals to be able to perform in the community. It's not simple ADL skills, but the ability to reflexively amend your responses. Not something that most schools concentrate on. Let's just move to, there's some other questions that you can consider as you move through the process, professionals to look at what are all of the barriers. Can you shift your mindset over the process to the actual destination of achieving something, and do that in a way that considers the priorities of parents in conjunction with the assessments that you're making? How can you better involve people in that process? Implore you to insert the in order to phraseology into everything you do to make that significant functional connection in what you're teaching to what is going to be needed when the educational mandate is over. Caregivers to identify, also parents, what are our personal barriers? What are the environmental barriers? How do we get around them? How do we balance our role? What is the vision? What's plan A, B, and C? 6 months, year, 5 years. Backward chain it from where you want to end up, and then all of the things that you need to get there. Can you do home alone? Can you do it for an hour? Can you do it for several hours? Where are you in that, and what do you need? Professionals picking the team, making the adjustments that you need to make according to what the system is demanding of you. Caregivers, what is your life plan? What is your life plan? And did you write it down? And how do you see yourself taking a more active role? How do you see yourself fading back? And that also goes for professionals, right? That clinical judgment of understanding when to push in and when to pull back is very difficult and is very complex. Keep in mind how your priorities change and shift. Global pandemics, family situations, resources, and how your transition plans need to amend to be able to keep up with that. We don't immediately move mountains. We begin by carrying away each and every little small stone. So think of each one of these transition components and the things that you have to do as each little stone that's going to, in the end, build this mountain of a life that they're going to be able to lead with quality and with dignity and with choice. And because we have autism, you know, don't waste my time. Look at and focus on all of these core components that drive transition plans to quality of life. What is the ultimate functionality? Make sure you do it with intensity. Adapt the environment when you have to, use technology when you have to, try to do it all within the natural environment in a way that emphasizes self-management and coping mechanisms when everything goes to hell in a handbasket. Make sure you're making your decisions according to the data that you collect, and you codify everything else in writing so that you're building your record and case, as it were, in case you need it. Maximize every instance of adaptive behavior and understand what the skill proficiency is that you need, because you don't really need to be fluent all the time. You don't even really need to be proficient. So understand what you're pushing for so that when it's all over, you're not just a couch potato, you have something to do. 50% of individuals with autism for 2 full years following their graduation have zero meaningful interaction, forget meaningful, any interaction with community or employment for 2 whole years. You may not be able to change all of the things that have gone wrong before, and I'm sure there's plenty, but you can change decisions on what your direction is going to be. And you have to focus on what you are doing, not what you're going to do, all of the plans, all of the checklists, all of the promises. It's a 1-a-day vitamin. What are we doing today? And how is it going to impact and make a meaningful change for tomorrow is always the question. And if they won't do it, because it's really, really hard to do this, then what do, Judy?
Well, we always encourage, obviously, to work as much as possible collaboratively with the IEP team, to work with your treating professionals. And, you know, the documentation and providing that to the IEP team and being in constant communication with them, in addition to getting perhaps treating professional reports or letters supporting the need for transition goals and what type of goals, et cetera, we very much encourage that. If that is not successful and you find that the team is not really addressing your child's needs, they're not appreciating what type of services and programming and transition programming they need, then and you've come to the end of the rope with them, then at that point you can file what's called a petition for due process. We always advise that you speak to an attorney. You can file it pro se on your own. It's pretty straightforward, and there are you can always go to the Department of Education in each of your states to look for the complaint notice. The thing is that we do advise that you at least have a consultation with an attorney before you take these steps. What that does is if you have, let's say, for example, I just want to mention this quickly because we are raising the filing of due process, that if you have a program that you do like, that has appropriate goals, that has a good transition program, and the IEP team decides to change that at an annual review meeting, then you must file a petition for due process within 15 days of that new program in order to invoke what's called stay put, which would basically allow your child to continue in the old program that you are satisfied with during the resolution of the dispute. And this would be another presentation to talk about the due process, filing a lawsuit and what that entails. And every step of the way, there's opportunities for mediation and settlement negotiations. And we certainly try to resolve this with the school as best as possible to reserve the resources for parents and for guardians. So I could go on forever about this, but you have rights to prepare. If you think that it's heading down that road, I cannot emphasize enough about documenting progress, lack of progress, coming with a recorder to an IEP meeting and recording the meeting, anything that you can provide later on to show that the district was not, or the program was not providing your child with FAPE, with free appropriate public education. And Gloria, that was fantastic. I just want to say.
I'm Gloria Satriali. I am the executive and director and founder of the PAL program. We actually do the things that I've been talking to you about in every aspect of life, surrounding life, every day for our individuals. Here are the resources that I referenced and that you saw in the slides. And if you need any more, please just go to our website or contact me directly and I'll help in any way that I can. Thank you very
Gloria,
much.
to be clear, could you go back to that previous slide?
Yeah, so you're going to post these.
Okay, so yeah, just to be clear, are you going to send this to us so we can post it on the NCSA website on the event page?
Yeah, so I sent it to you yesterday. I can resend it to you again. And in fact, maybe what I'll do is I'll remove the videos so that it isn't such a huge file, but for any of the participants here, if, Jill will post it, you'll download it. These are actual PDF files that you can access simply by clicking on the box. Oh, there's one box that isn't. Oh, so this box here that doesn't seem to be a box anymore. This is Virginia Commonwealth Transition Guide. I want to point that out because this is something you're going to be very interested in. This is the best thing that's out there right now.
I think it would be easiest for people if we could just post the links directly from our website. So I didn't see that email, but I will be sure to circle back with you so that we can have this complete, hopefully by the end of tomorrow. If not, then early next week. Everything on our ncsautism.org website. Okay, so there's a little bit in chat. Let me take a look to see if we have some additional questions. Okay, let's go ahead with this. In New York, I have been told that if my student is in a diploma program, then in order for him not to receive that diploma at the end of 12th grade, I would have to remove him from the public setting before graduation, ? That if the student is on track to get a diploma, the school will just award it, even if we disagree with that.
No, you have to put in writing, at least in New Jersey, and I'm sure it's the same in New York, you put in writing that you do not want your child graduating. They can stay in, you can be in the public school and you can request that your child has not received either the services or they have achieved their goals that they need to achieve that are in their IEP, and therefore they cannot graduate and that they will not be graduating. We even have kids that they don't graduate, they're not technically graduating, but they can go with the rest of their friends or the rest of their class and go through graduation ceremonies and, if they want to be with their friends. And we have kids who are out of district and are not graduating either. So that is not true. You don't have to disenroll from the public school. You can remain there as long as you communicate that you do not want your child graduating. It shouldn't happen. Like they can't graduate him without, or they shouldn't graduate him without him achieving he or she achieving the goals and objectives in the IEP, and providing a transition program.
Right. Okay. With that, any last words from our illustrious speakers today? No. Okay. Well, in that case, thank you so much. It was really quite a packed presentation. As usual with these webinars, I'm like, I've got to go back and review the recording in order to absorb everything. I have a 15-year-old girl with autism who has just started the process of transition planning. So I'm going to take some of this into my own life. And to everybody out there, we will try to get everything up on our website today, tomorrow, or early next week. So just stay tuned for that. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Gloria. That was great.
Thank
you,
you.
everybody. We're signing
Sorry
off.
for the technical glitches. Ugh.
It happens. This is the age of Zoom. I think we're used to it by now.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. No worries.
Bye now.
No worries. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, everybody, for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye.